Egypt's history spans more than 5,000 years. Among the many ancient nations, Egypt stands out for its significant achievements, including numerous wonders of the world and enduring accomplishments that still amaze us today. In this video, I will put the entire history of Egypt into a 10-minute format. Rather than following traditional history texts that divide Egypt into countless periods, we will divide our history into three main parts: ancient, Greco-Roman, and Arab Egypt, which continues to this day. Let's start with a brief introduction and go back not thousands, but tens of thousands of years. Back then, Africa was different. Vast tropical forests stretched across the continent, where human civilization was being born. Later, the climate of Africa, including Egypt, became more arid, and the territory turned into savanna. There is little evidence of the earliest humans in the country. Scientists believe that Homo sapiens passed through these lands because Egypt was an ideal corridor for migration from East Africa to Asia. About 10,000 years ago, people of Semitic origin settled in this land, the origins of which scientists are still studying. People settled in Egypt thanks to the incredible fertility of the Nile River. Not for nothing did ancient people call Egypt the gift of the Nile. Tens of thousands of years ago, a bay of the Mediterranean Sea was located in what is now northern Egypt. Later, this bay turned into land and became a place flooded by the Nile when it overflowed its banks. Numerous rains caused severe floods, which were considered gifts from the gods. After all, the silt made the soil fertile, and the water helped grow almost anything on it. When the Nile returned to its banks, ancient Egyptians sowed the valley and harvested crops. Then, they consumed them while the scorching sun burned the soil, making it unsuitable for farming. But with the next Nile flood, the cycle repeated. This is why, one after another, settlements appeared in the Nile Valley. Around 7,000 years ago, there were about 40 mini-states in the valley, and they all faced one problem: lack of labor. The population was growing, and to continue feeding off the Nile, they needed to innovate. Therefore, the mini-states united, built dams, canals, reservoirs, and other agricultural structures, on the one hand, to retain the water of the flooded Nile longer, and on the other, to sow and settle more territories. In the 4th millennium BCE, this process led to the formation of two large states, Upper and Lower Egypt. For some time, they opposed each other, but eventually, Upper Egypt prevailed. Pharaoh Narmer, also known as Menes, founded what historians call the dynastic period. This is the ancient Egypt that is familiar in general terms, with pharaohs, pyramids, and the conventional division into the early, old, middle, and other kingdoms. Since this division is traditional, I won't dwell on it in detail. Let's focus on the main points. During the pharaohs' dynastic period, Egypt evolved into a true state, with borders slowly expanding beyond the Nile. An effective army defended against nomads from Arabia, Ethiopia, and other regions. Most notably, Egyptians constructed grand structures beyond pyramids, showcasing their advancements. In the Old Kingdom, from 2700 to 2100 BCE, Egyptians mastered geometry, developed a solar calendar, and studied the stars. These scientific achievements enabled the construction of the Great Pyramids, relying on stone processing skills and agricultural success. They built canal systems nearly as effectively as modern ones and learned to bake bread, brew beer, and fully develop writing. Early attempts to connect the Nile with the Red Sea foreshadowed the Suez Canal. However, the worsening climate and increasing corruption led to centuries of civil wars, fragmenting Egypt. During the Middle Kingdom period, 2100 to 1750 BCE, internal conflicts continued, but there was also significant progress. Egyptians excelled in bronze production, established schools, and adopted papyrus. They developed reservoir systems, with the 12th dynasty pharaohs revitalizing Lake Meris, Fayum, into an artificial reservoir. Pharaoh Amenemhat III's engineering projects allowed control of the Nile's floodwaters and irrigation for necessary lands, supporting extensive agriculture. Unfortunately, this period ended when Asian nomads, the Hyksos, captured most of the Nile Delta. It would take a couple of hundred years before the New Kingdom era began. Approximately from 1550 to 1069 BCE, Egypt rose from the ashes. During this period, the territory reached its peak. They learned to build wells and mastered chariots. Egyptians successfully opposed the Persians and other peoples. It was during this era that the famous Ramses II and Nefertiti lived. Temples were erected, writing was improved, and great attention was paid to educating children. However, Excessive temple building undermined the state's economy. The priests of the god Amun plunged Egypt into chaos for 400 years. Pharaohs changed frequently. Sometimes, several contenders ruled simultaneously, and the power of the priests almost destroyed the state. Additionally, the Persians intervened and effectively conquered Egypt. Only by around 600 BCE, with the help of Greek mercenary troops, did Pharaoh Psamtik manage to restore some authority. But still, by 525 BCE, Egypt became part of the Persian Empire. This is an important date because from this moment, ancient Egypt de facto ceased to exist as an independent state. But despite all Egypt retained its importance, as Alexander the Great in 332 BCE wrested Egypt from the Persians, incorporating it into his empire, wonders of the world were erected one after another. The Great Lighthouse, the Library of Alexandria, and the city of Alexandria itself once again made Egypt a major player on the international stage, as well as the main supplier of grain and effectively the world's capital of science. However, people began to speak and write in Greek. The traditional writing system gradually faded away. You are well acquainted with the last pharaoh of the Greco-Macedonian Ptolemaic dynasty. It's Cleopatra, who had relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. After her death in 30 BCE, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. This period lasted until 642 CE, with the caveat that, after the division of the empire, the country became part of Byzantium. Significant achievements did not mark the period. Egypt stagnated in development and transformed from a cultural center into a supplier of food. The Library of Alexandria was gradually looted, and later, its destruction was attributed to the Arabs, who brought Islam to Egypt in 640 CE. The Islamization of the country happened quite quickly. In a few hundred years, the entire country spoke Arabic and externally became Arab. Some canals, including predecessors of the Suez, fell into decline. Scientific activity also diminished. Egypt remains much the same to this day. In 870 CE, the country left the Arab Caliphate and, for almost 700 years, was formally independent. The most notable figure of this period is Salah ad-Din, Saladin, who fought against the Crusaders and significantly expanded the state's territory. Unfortunately, apart from military achievements, there were no significant successes. Analyzing the climate, scientists conclude that Egyptians of this era did not fully utilize the soil's fertility, and the country was rather underpopulated than overpopulated. However, it's worth noting that this is an important exception. During the rule of Ahmad ibn Tulun, Egyptians mastered textile production and developed economically. Also, in 972 CE, Al-Azhar University was established, one of the oldest operating universities in the world. In 1517, Egypt became part of the Ottoman Empire and turned into a province. The situation resembled Roman times, but now the country fed the Turks and followed their orders. Of interest is Napoleon's unsuccessful campaign in Egypt and the construction of the Suez Canal, connecting the Mediterranean and Red Seas. Such a canal had been a dream since the time of the pharaohs, but eventually, in 1869, it was completed by the French and British, who later took all the profits away from the Egyptians. As a result of numerous uprisings, Egypt regained ownership of the canal. And by the way, right now, income from the canal is the country's second largest source of revenue right after tourism. Around the same time, Egypt fell under the influence of the British Empire, effectively losing independence. During World War I, the ruler of Egypt tried to side with Germany, but was quickly overthrown, and the country effectively became a British colony. Egyptians fought against this fate so actively that just a few decades later in 1936, the British granted Egypt full independence. During World War II, there was a group that wanted to support Germany, but it was quickly suppressed. Officially, Egypt maintained neutrality and declared war on the Axis powers only in 1945, but in reality, the British used the country as a transit point for their troops and as an airbase. In many ways, subordination to the British led to the Revolution of 1952, as well as to poverty, corruption, and fatigue from sultans who were dragging the country into ruin one after another. As a result, Egypt emerged in a more or less modern form. The country has a president, truly independent policies, and interests. The main one I've already mentioned is the Suez Canal. Due to its nationalization in 1956, a war began between Egypt and Britain, France, and Israel. It's easy to guess that the odds were slim, but help came from an unexpected place. On one hand, the USA pressured its allies, not wanting wars to be waged without its permission, and on the other, the USSR saw Egypt as an excellent ally. Khrushchev even threatened England and France with thermonuclear strikes on their capitals. Under pressure from the two superpowers and the UN, the war stopped. But Egypt still harbors cool relations and resentment toward its opponents. But that's a story for political scientists, and I've done my work. And that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed my retelling of Egypt's history in 10 minutes. If so, I'd love to see your likes and comments with your thoughts on new video topics.